First of all, thank you very much for being here. I know you're super busy. You're traveling the state. You got a lot going on, and I really appreciate you taking time because this is viewers that are generating these. Some of them are going to be difficult questions. Nothing you probably haven't had already. But we are, for our series, The Pulse, we go out, we get questions via Facebook, social media, and these are some of the questions our viewers had. First of all, we start with Mark Felton. He's from Middleton, and he wants me to ask you, what specifically are your legislative priorities when you get reelected, if you are fortunate enough to win the vote on June 5th?
Well, a couple different things, all which relate to jobs and keeping our fiscal house in order. One of the big things we need to do, both working with the legislature and working with our administration, as well as the private sector, is help connect more people to the skill sets needed to meet the job openings of today. I just had a company in Oshkosh, and they want to hire more people. They were at 76 employees last year. They're up to about 90 right now. But their biggest problem is they don't have enough skilled workers to match those jobs. So for welders, machinists, fabricators in particular, those are areas of great need in the state. I want to do more to try and redeploy resources into those areas, and in many ways even go right into our schools and promote the benefits of a career in manufacturing.
I saw your W3 program we profiled as well yesterday.
Yeah.
How much, following up on that question, how much role can a governor have in job creation? There are factors working against you. There are factors working for you. What role can a governor have in that?
Well, I think
obviously you haven't quite got as much as you wanted.
Yeah. Obviously, we had a job gains last year, which is good. About 30,000 jobs since I've taken office, but still a ways off from the 250,000. We hope to have the help the people of the state create by 2015. But it's a number of things. Part of it's creating a better business climate. I mean, think about it. 2 years ago, 10% of our employers, when surveyed by the Chamber of Commerce, said they thought the state was heading in the right direction. Just a few months ago in 2012, that number climbed to 94%. And a similar survey a couple weeks later said that 87% of those employers surveyed believe that they're going to add more jobs in 2012. Ironically, the biggest concern of most small businesses who said they were waiting to hire was the recall. They feel like we're heading forward. They don't want to go backwards. And once we get past June 5th, I think you're going to be seeing a takeoff. But one of the big things the government can do is help direct more of our attention, more of our resources to connecting particularly young people into an interest in the manufacturing field area. That's where job growth is. It's where there are good careers, not just jobs. And there's great opportunity. And if we want to continue to be a leader, an industrial leader when it comes to manufacturing, we've got to do more to promote that.
Let's be honest, 250,000 jobs was a huge number. Any regrets about throwing that number out? That's a massive number of jobs. Do you wish maybe 100,000 wouldn't have been a bad number?
You got to aim high. I mean, remember, a good analogy since we've been talking about Donald Driver these days, Vince Lombardi, the year before he took over the Green Bay Packers, they were 1-10-1. He didn't take them to the World Championship the very first year, but he built a positive foundation for success, and he built off of that. And a few years later, they were the world champions, first of many under Coach Lombardi. In our case, I think you're going to see a compounding factor that after these recalls, even though we've gained more than 30,000 jobs since I took office, I think you start seeing that number compound. And as employers see that, particularly small business leaders and family farmers and others see this, I think it's this thing that will take off, and I think we're going to get there by 2015.
Now, there are skeptics on that number that came out last week. Is there any chance on June 28th, that's when those numbers get confirmed, right?
Yeah.
Any chance that's going to be off?
No. I mean, you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the federal government, their own website points out that there's very little, if any, variance of any state, not just Wisconsin, between the numbers collected. Remember, the difference between the numbers my opponent highlights is a sample of 3.5% on a monthly basis with all the employers in the state. The numbers we're talking about are required by law to be collected from nearly every employer. More than 96% of all the employers in the state have to do this. This is a number that's well documented, that economists across the board, including some economists who support my opponent, all acknowledge and agree that these are the more valid numbers, and that's why people should look at them as the facts.
All right, next question comes from Linda Palmer. She's in Madison. She asks, after the recall election, what would you plan to do if elected to mend the fences? It's a very divided state, as you know. I mean, that's beyond denial. What can you do personally, I don't know, to reach out to Democrats? Because there are a lot of fired up people.
I think part of it's the idea of moving on and moving forward. Some of it we already started doing this last year. I mean, you get past these recalls and a lot of the influences from either side that have come into the state will move on to states like Ohio and Florida and others, and that allows us here in Wisconsin, where we've had plenty of passionate debates in the past. I remember in 2000, 2004, we were the closest blue state in America. So there's about an even number of Republican and Democrat voters out there. But I think we get past it by honing in on things we agree on. Education reform is a good example of that. Dr. Tony Evers and I, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, have been working together now for more than a year on our Read to Lead initiative to improve reading scores for kids in this state, particularly in the elementary school level, educator effectiveness, where we took Dr. Evers took the lead on that. We worked with him on that, and even school and school district accountability. We brought a very diverse group of interests from around the state together, including lawmakers of both parties, but much broader in terms of parents, educators, business leaders, philanthropic groups. We can do that on other issues.
Brian Stokoven, I hope I pronounced that right, of Madison, he says, Governor Walker, do you have any political ambitions beyond the current office of governor of Wisconsin? You've said your sons kind of scoff at the idea of you being the rock star of the Republican Party, but
that's exactly right.
I mean, how about, you're not going to sit here and say, I'm going to be president someday when you're running for governor, but,
right.
But what about, I don't know, Republican National Convention's coming up. Will you be the keynote speaker? Have they asked you to be a keynote speaker? Have they?
No, I mean, anybody I've talked to politically is completely focused, as I am, for between now and June 5th. That's really the bottom line. And I can't imagine, I can't fathom going through all of this election, going through all what's happened the last year and a half, and not wanting to see the job done. My goal, as you mentioned, amongst other things, is to help the people, not the government, the people of the state, create 250,000 jobs. The last thing I want to do is go through this sort of a campaign and then not be around to see that goal fulfilled. I'm committed to making sure we get that by 2015. The only way I can do that is if I stay here as governor.
And so if Mitt Romney wins, you're not going to, the last Republican governor elected here was Tommy Thompson. He left to become a cabinet member. No interest in that sort of thing.
No, if Mitt Romney, as the nominee, were to ask to be a part of a cabinet or even as a vice president, I'd suggest one of the best people to ask from Wisconsin would be Paul Ryan.
All right, okay, so he's stumping for Paul Ryan for VP. All right, well, we've already asked about the jobs thing, and okay, let's go back to the collective bargaining, and I've asked you this personally a couple times since you were elected, and since I did your debate on statewide a year and a half ago. Any regrets on how you approached the collective bargaining debate?
Sure.
When you go back, it wasn't something you brought up at all, really, during the campaign. When I asked you this question last year, you said, people should have seen how I governed in Milwaukee County. Do you wish you'd have been more upfront about the collective bargaining?
I think about more when I was in office. I mean, I've talked about it for 8 years as a county executive over and over again because I saw the failures at a local level that where it really handicapped both local officials in the county as well as school districts and others out there. I think if I had to do over again, what I do is last January and February, I would have made a more compelling case. I would have gone around the state. I would have included people in the discussion and told them things like, well, you know, for example, in schools across our state, before our reforms, nearly every school district in the state had to buy their health insurance from just one company, and that cost them tens of millions of dollars more than they need to. If I'd told them about how, because of collective bargaining, many of our local governments were forced to deal with abuses and overtime, for example, right here in Madison, where a city bus driver made $150,000 because of overtime, or where you'd have some levels of state government where some collective bargaining agreements allowed them to call in sick on one shift and work time and a half the next shift. I think in all those issues, if I'd made a more compelling case about those sorts of examples, I think taxpayers, be they Republican or Democrat, most taxpayers in the state would have said, Governor, you need to fix that. My problem was I fixed it, and then I went out and talked about it. Most politicians talk about it and never fix it. In the future, my hope is to not avoid fixing things, fixing problems that come up, but understand that not only is the product important, so is the process, and it's got to be an inclusive one.
A lot of people ask, will you make this a right-to-work state after election? You will not.
No, and I really have no interest in this. I think if we look back over what's happened over the last year and a half, I think the vast majority of us, regardless of party in the state, don't want to replay that debate. Ironically, the only candidate in this election who wants to do that is my opponent. The mayor of Milwaukee wants to go back and replay that exact same debate by redebating collective bargaining out there. I want to move on and move forward. And you don't do that through issues like right to work and others out there. I think most of us are just ready to move on, get onto the issues where I think there's a greater consensus out there and get the state moving forward.
Would you sign legislation if it passed through?
I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't happen. And I'm fairly convinced that that's not just a sentiment I have. I think lawmakers, particularly in both parties, agree with me that they don't want to have that debate again.
I know you like Mitch Daniels from my home state of Indiana, the governor where I grew up in that state. He also at one point said no to right to work. It led to the Democrats fled that state because of that same debate. So
yeah, the thing I like about Mitch though is what you look in that state, overall personal income grew. The economy had a significant turnaround during particularly the early stages of his tenure where it had been in the dumps before he took office. And even under what he did for collective bargaining, you saw that state become where it was not only good for the taxpayers, the government became more efficient, more accountable to the taxpayers. It was also great for good employees. Good employees ended up being rewarded and acknowledged throughout this process. That's something in the past where because of collective bargaining, we couldn't distinguish it either at the state or at the local level between employees who excel and those who maybe aren't living up to those standards, we can do that now.
All right, our last question from our viewer comes from Alicia Ohala Johnson of Marinette, now living in Madison. And you've been asked this many times about the defense fund, and she asks, what is the need for a defense fund for your lawyers?
Yeah, for us it's simple. We're cooperating with John Chisholm, the district attorney in Milwaukee County, someone I asked originally to look into this issue. And when you look at the volume of all the issues before us, that's something that I don't think people want the governor of the state of Wisconsin spending hours, if not days, looking into the details on. But my integrity's always been intact. It was high as a member of the state legislature, accounted for from both political parties. It's been a very high standard I've had as the county executive, continues to be as the governor, and will be throughout this whole process. The interesting thing is I've always had a clear standard against a very strict policy against using taxpayers' resources for political or campaign purposes. And the facts have shown already this year, anytime that's been brought to my attention, I've acted on it. So I think people will clearly see that this is a process that isn't going to change over time. Will remain intact with high integrity.
And Mayor Barrett asked for certain emails for you to release this week. Are you allowed to release those emails? Will you?
The mayor of Milwaukee's a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. He should know better than anybody that under the context of this investigation, which we asked to initiate, we can't by law do that. And so this is just another one of those issues where the mayor, I think, originally this whole debate about the recall was supposedly about our reforms. Well, they stopped talking about it because our reforms saved the taxpayers $1 billion and helped property taxes go down for the first time in 12 years. Then it was about the budget, but then they found out the budget actually had a $154 million surplus. And then it was about jobs in 2011, and well, then the actual reports from employers showed that we gained, not lost, jobs in 2011. And so they keep moving around. I think, unfortunately, what it is it's a desperate statements from a desperate campaign, and we're going to stay focused on what we're going to do to move this state forward.
All right, Governor, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I know